Good evening, everybody. My name is Mel V, coming to you live on Conscious Consumer Network this Wednesday evening, the 4th of January, 2017. The time, of course, is 9 p.m. GMT, and hello to you wherever you may be on this wonderful planet. Thank you for tuning in. Tonight, we restart with Dragonology Season 3. And oh boy, I'm so excited because of all the shows that we get to do on Conscious Consumer Network Live. Dragonology has to be one of my all-time favorite. Of course, it's been an amazing journey of discovery to compile all this information, to learn from it, and then, of course, to be able to communicate with it. And, of course, then the feedback loop, which is people coming to us and bringing us information and talking to us about things, which has been just an amazing experience unto itself, because everybody has something to contribute. And of course, we've learned a great deal from a great many people. So with no further ado, I'm going to jump straight into the first episode of Season 3 of Dragonology by asking the obvious question. And we'll just do a bit of let's say, a brief catch-up first before we dive head-on into tonight's information, which pretty much does pick up from where we left off at the end of Season 2. So first off, what is Dragonology? Well, it can be defined as a postgraduate level course in cultural anthropology, a course in neurolinguistic deprogramming, an investigation into our hidden history, an exploration of the dragon cult, and of course, a deconstruction of language, symbolism, myth, and fairy tale. Okay, that's a very prosaic look at what Dragonology is. Of course, it goes much deeper than this because Dragonology provides clear indication as to who our controllers are, who and what they have been in recorded history, myth, fairy tale, and folklore, where they have largely been masked through the mode of application of symbolic representatives to mask the true nature and identity of the dragon. Now, I use this picture because it is, of course, one of my favorite go-to pictures, and it is a picture from 1410 from a book of stories, I should say, that were made in that time, and it's called Melusine's Secret Discovered. That's the name of the picture from a storybook called Le Roman de Melusine, and it's one of 16 paintings by Gilbert de Metz, and of course the original of this painting and the book, which is the story of Le Roman de Melusine, that's held in France in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and I really want to get by that sometime and actually photograph it because it was a hand-painted, hand-illustrated book from the 1400s. And of course, you notice here Queen Melusine is very clearly depicted with wings and what looks to be a serpent or dragon's tail, which of course is very telling as to who these dragons had been in history, of course the kings and queens and royalty. So Dragonology is the deciphering of the artificial draconian construct projected upon humanity in order to keep us enslaved through an exploration of etymology, words, language, literature, symbolism, art, architecture, artifacts, history, mythology, fairy tale, anthropology, and culture. And what is the purpose of Dragonology? Of course, the purpose is to identify the common origin of our present-day culture, societies, religion, and war, which can all be traced back to the dragon and the worship thereof, taking the form of rituals very often involving sacrifice, human sacrifice for that matter, often babies, and a few other unpleasant themes which come up alongside that, all in the name of ritual. And we shall be discussing that and decoding that in further detail. And of course, language is symbolic. And one of the interesting things to note when you start getting into the whole Dragonology aspect, please do go back and re-watch or go and watch for the first time Season 1 and Season 2 to get an understanding of exactly how language is symbolic. All language comprises of multi-layered symbolic expression, from the individual characters to syllable groupings to much more occult or hidden meaning. The earliest written languages are made up of symbols, and many deeper symbolic allegories lay hidden within our language. And of course, anybody who's seen, for example, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, that is a pictorial type language which is largely made up of symbolic representatives in the form of lexicons or ideograms or pictures. And that is exactly how language has evolved. It's a symbolic representation of a thought or a word or an idea or a concept or a meaning, abstract or simple, but we've found a way in which to communicate that in a written visual form. So, of course, language is, of course, very symbolically expressive, and all language is basically just extended and evolved multi-layered symbolism. So what is a symbol then? A symbol is a thing conventionally regarded as typifying, representing, or recalling something, especially an idea or quality. It may be a mark of character, taken as a conventional sign of some object, idea, function, or process. The purpose and application of a symbol is to substitute an object with its symbolic counterpart. So it's about the substitution. Adoption and use of symbols is universal to all cultures and is primarily used as a mechanism of subterfuge in order to mask the existence of the dragon, whilst covertly worshipping it with symbolic expression. Okay. And of course, it is crucial to grasp the repetition of certain themes and patterns in order to see the full extent of the draconian construct. So that is the one thing that we like to do a lot with Dragonology, is to constantly bring back the reoccurring themes and show everybody where these reoccurring themes turn up and the extensions of these themes, because all themes have sort of a core, and then they kind of expand and extend through symbolic allegory, sometimes multi-layered, and you really have to peel back through the layers to understand, the key indicators, the markers, the reoccurring themes, and why they're important, because once you start to recognize them, it's almost impossible not to see them in your day-to-day reality. Okay, so let's get a few basics out the way so that there's no confusion going forward. Obviously, if you want to find out anything more about this, please do your own research. We've got 2 seasons of Dragonology, 13 episodes each for you to go through. There's 2 documentary films, Chasing the Dragon, Part 1 and 2, which of course I made both of them, so you're welcome to check those out. Both of them are available on dragonology.info. And of course, if that's not enough research for you, you're welcome to download my book and read through that too, to understand the clear, simple fact that dragons are real. Dragons are not just mythological creatures relegated to the realms of semi-dismissive fairy tale. They were and are very real creatures that exist and have very distinctive non-human features and abilities. As I say, please go research this for yourself. And over here, of course, is typical sort of Chinese, Japanese dragon. It's an Oriental dragon image depiction. Of course, you get a lot of dragons in the Orient. They turn up absolutely everywhere, and Southeast Asia. It's actually pretty much every culture across the world, really. Okay, so dragon gods and royals. Again, when we are referencing dragons, we are also referencing what we typically know as gods or deities, devils and angels, rulers and royalty, fairies, jinn. There's just a number of different names and labels that have been given to these creatures in different mythologies, in different histories, in different contexts across the ages. So we just have to get a basic understanding of where these creatures played into and what labels they've been understood as in various texts throughout history. And also important to know up front, of course, is that the dragon and the serpent. Serpents are a symbol of the dragon. Okay, so dragons and serpents are inextricably linked. Dragons are commonly symbolically referenced as being serpentine in nature. And I do reference this picture over here, which is an artifact from ancient Egypt depicting a body of a cobra with wings and the head of a human. Okay, which is very, very interesting because that is what we typically define as a serpentine depiction or a draconian depiction. This would possibly be referencing a pharaoh because it was normally the pharaohs that were of the dragon bloodline. And of course, the interlinking of the dragon and serpent is clearly laid out in the biblical book of Revelations, chapter 20, verse 2. It says, I've got this from the King James Version, by the way. And he laid hold, the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. Okay? So it references here that the dragon is a serpent and the devil, known as Satan, which is interesting. And please always remember that dragon, serpent, devil, Satan, all interlinked, all the same thing, all different words for the same entity. Okay, which is very important to understand is that there have been many different ways of referencing dragons throughout history. And in fact, when you go and you do the etymological deconstruction and the research, you'll eventually begin to see how all these creatures tie together and how all the words interlink into each other. It's an amazingly interesting journey. And of course, dragons are very much interlinked and associated with the origins of everything, be it the origins of humanity, the origins of the world, the origins of our culture as we know it. In fact, the very creational myths that we found in various cultures throughout the world usually have some form of creational, primordial, protagonic deity that is somewhat serpent-like in nature, or serpentine, or dragon-like. And I mean, it's in every cultural mythology just about. For example, you get it in the Chinese cultural mythologies, you get it in the Aboriginal, or should I say original cultural mythologies of Australia, where they talk about the rainbow serpent being the creator of humanity. And of course, you just have to go to the Bible to find the creational myth featuring Adam and Eve and a serpent. I mean, it's very, very obviously there. And it's interesting to notice these themes reoccur. So creation and serpent, creational myth, dragon gods as created gods, very much an interlinking thing. So in many different cultural mythologies and histories, dragons or serpents are like deities and are credited with being the creators of humanity. In the biblical creational myth, the serpent deity is present. Of course, it was the serpent that got Eve to munch on that apple. All evidence suggests that dragons are involved with the creation of humanity, and they serve as our gods and rulers. Now let's talk about some of the sort of, if you created the world, what sort of themes are going to be associated with you? Well, for one, the creational element. Let's talk about that. This is where we kind of finished off at the end of season 2, talking about the things that are linked with the dragon. And one of the things that most certainly are the creational elements. Dragons are inextricably linked with the 4 elements of creation, being water, air, fire, and earth. And we gave many examples of this in episode 13 of season 3. So if you want to go back and check this out, please do. But I'll go through some very quick ones. Dragons, of course, are inextricably linked and associated with water and are commonly thought to be able to manipulate and transverse or travel through water or breathe underwater. There are many water-associated dragon entities such as sirens, nymphs, mermaids, you think of Poseidon, it's just Doris, Phorcys from Greek mythology. They're all sort of water deities. Okay, lots and lots of dragon water deities. And of course, this is typically what you would think of as a leviathan, which is a water sea serpent type dragon creature. And then, of course, dragons are associated with air, as they're often depicted being winged and thus are able to manipulate and transverse or travel through the air. And of course, there is a huge etymological similarity between the word wing and wind. Only one letter difference there. And of course, dragons are associated with fire, one of the creational elements. And they're often said to be able to breathe fire. In fact, one of the most common images of dragons when they seem to be animated in cartoons, Disney, and for example, Lord of the Rings, dragons seem to have been portrayed with the ability to breathe fire, which, you know, again, quite a unique ability, not a non-human trait. And of course, dragons are associated with the earth. Dragons are linked with themes of earth through a series of allegorical symbols, such as being credited with the creation of earth and through the earth mother or mother goddess archetypes. And of course, there's many examples of this again, which you can go and check out. But what is most interesting is, despite being very clearly and inextricably linked with the themes of elemental creation, there is, of course, that elusive fifth element, that hidden fifth element, which dragons, again, are inextricably linked with. And the fifth element is spirit or ether, which is interesting because dragons are very much linked with the word spirit. And the word spirit is a multi-layered symbolic allegory, which you can decipher in many different directions. But for the purposes of this, let's just stay with the fact that the word spirit is rooted in serpentine etymology through the word spiera or spiro, which actually means dragon. Just like the word spiral, when you think of how snakes coil and spiral, it also comes from the dragon word spiero. And when we talk about the Holy Spirit in sort of Catholic religions or Christian religions, it's normally depicted as a dove. Now, what is interesting is that the word dove in Latin is columba, and the word serpent is coluba. The word columba and coluba are etymologically cognizant with each other. In fact, the bird and the serpent are inextricably linked with each other, which is ironic that the serpent root word spirit is often depicted as a bird, in fact, a dove. Interesting stuff. Always, everything always links back into each other. That's why this is such an exact science. All right, now moving on. This is approaching new territory here because I've just briefly gone over what we covered off at the end of the last of season 2. Okay, and yes, dragons are said to be creation of God's, creators of humanity, creators of our culture, the roots of our culture and our modern day rituals and traditions. And of course, they're said to be inextricably linked, or they are inextricably linked with not just the 4, but the 5 elements of creation, including spirit, and on multi-levels there too. Well, dragons are not only linked with the creational elements, but with time and space. You would imagine if you are a creational God, that time and space is something that you are connected with, because everything happens in our reality, three-dimensional reality, through a fabric of time and space continuum. So it is commonly conceptualized that when we exist within a time-space continuum, it is commonly conceptualized that we are existing within a time-space continuum. That's how it is kind of put to us when we learn about it in science and physics. Well, the funny thing is that dragons are also erroneously associated with themes pertaining to time and space. And I'll go on to explain that in a bit more detail, because here is where it gets super, super interesting. Let's start with space. Okay, dragon kings in 4 directions. All right, now we're going to talk about space. We think about space, think about, okay, so maybe there's up, there's down, there's within, okay? There's as above, so below, and within. But what about that way? And this is the space I'm talking about. When we're talking about like the 4 corners of the globe or the 4 corners of the world or whatever, we normally work off the compass. And it's normally divided into north, east, south, and west. And what's interesting is in Chinese mythologies, there were 4 dragon kings, each ruling over one of the 4 seas, being the seas of the north, the seas of the east, seas of the west, and the seas of the south. So the dragons are inextricably linked with the concept of space, okay? The 4 directions, the space in which, you know, and how do we label that space? Well, that direction of space is north and that direction is south, you know, for example. So again, proof that the dragons are inextricably linked with space, particularly in Chinese mythology, being linked with the 4 directions. And then, of course, the dragon and the sun symbolism, which I must just say, if you want to learn more about this, please go back and watch the previous episodes, previous seasons of Dragonology, or read the book, because it is just impossible to separate the dragon from sun symbolism. In fact, the sun is nothing more than a multi-layered allegory for dragon worship, particularly the anthropomorphized sun, which is the sun that tends to have a face on it, a humanized face. And basically, the sun is the way in which we as human beings have made up time. For example, the way in which we've created our clock is devised around the movements of the sun. You know, the 24-hour cycle absolutely follows the movements of the sun, day and night. For example, there's certain hours which always fall at night time, certain hours which always fall during the daytime. And that's because time has clearly been marked and measured according to the movements of the sun. So time and dragon are inextricably linked because sun symbolism and the dragon are inextricably linked. The sun is a multi-layered symbolic allegory masking the dragon, okay? And an example of this here, again, in Egyptian mythology or Egyptian religion, Egyptian ancient history. This is typical of one of the amazing ancient artworks on the walls found in one of the ancient Egyptian temples. And here what we have is, again, the serpent with the wings, all right, and it's got a sun above its head. Here again as well, the serpent with the wings, as we spoke about earlier, with the sun above its head. But not only that, you've got the solar disk here with the two pairs of rearing rays. That's what they're called, these two serpents that are on either side of the Egyptian sun disk. They are called rays, and they always seem to be found together, these rays and the sun disk. Very, very often found together. So that is important to know. If you don't believe that the sun and the serpent are inextricably linked, just go to Egyptian mythology. It's the clearest example of how true this is. Now, why it's important to understand the symbolic significance of the sun is because time has been marked out by the sun. Now, one of the greatest cycles of time, which we talk about the calendar year, you have something called the zodiac, which is the calendar year divided into 12 sections. And they don't fall exactly at the start and end of each calendar month. In fact, sometimes the shift is slightly over. But it definitely divides the year up into 12 equal parts. That's what the Western Hermetic zodiac does, and each part has, a representation. For example, I'm born in Gemini, 23rd of May, Gemini. Husband's in June, so he would be Cancerian. My mother, for example, in January, she's Aquarius. Different signs are representative. You are said to be born into the sign that on the date that you're born in. So whatever house or birth sign you're born into, that is your supposed zodiac or birth sign. Okay? Pretty simple to understand. Most people completely get that concept. Slightly more, or should I say, slightly less common is the Shenzhou or the Chinese zodiac, which, like the Western Hermetic zodiac, is also divided into 12 parts. But rather than marking out a calendar year, it actually marks out a procession of 12 years. And each year is marked with a specific representative animal. Okay, for example, I was born in 1976. So you're looking at the year of the dragon, which is why, of course, my fascination with dragonology. And, of course, the Chinese zodiac has many recognizable animals around the perimeter that you probably find in everyday life: rabbit, tiger, ox, rat, dog, rooster, monkey, sheep, horse, snake. These are all very common animals. Most people would be able to identify them if they came across them. However, if people came across a dragon in the middle of the street, I think they would freak out just a little bit, because a dragon is supposed to be non-existent or mythological. Yet, along with all the other commonly found creatures in the Chinese zodiac, here it turns up, most interestingly. So what is interesting to note about these two is that they, again, are this is a year cycle, and this is a 12-year cycle. But again, it's marked by the movements of the sun. all right? The zodiac, the Western Hermetic zodiac charts the sun's movements through the sky over the course of the year. That's what it is all about. And in fact, you can see a sun symbol smack in the center of that. And the sun symbol in the center is important because the central point of that is a representation of the sun, and we'll go into that a little bit more in just a few minutes. Now, what's interesting to notice is the cross of the zodiac, which we can see here, right? The cross of the zodiac is actually would sit here in the zodiacal markings, and what it does is it marks out the solstice and equinox lines in the zodiac circle. All right, so you get the cross going down vertically and horizontally within a circle. The cross of the zodiac is the oldest conceptual image known to man, and the movements of the sun have always been tracked by ancient cultures who mark the equinox and solstice both symbolically and astrologically with aligned temples. All right, and that's very interesting to note, is that a lot of ancient temples are aligned with equinoxes and solstices. An example of this is the temples of the dragon or the sun, which are, again, very, very interesting. This particular picture, Sansaphia, is actually taken by Sansaphia. She is Graham Hancock's spouse, his husband, I beg your pardon, Graham Hancock's wife. And this is taken at Angkor Wat in Cambodia. And this is the sun rising over the central tower of Angkor Wat at dawn on the spring equinox. So you'll notice that the central tower is perfectly aligned to the sun at spring equinox, which is amazing. Look how beautifully that sits on the top of the central tower. I want to just show you a few more pictures of this temple because it's just, you know, I haven't been there. I'm dying to go check this temple out. It's just on the ground, a massive complex. The oldest parts of it are only 800 years old, but it looks like this temple, the layout for it on the ground was done 12,500 years before present time. And obviously it's been repaired and added to over the years, the latest layers and so forth, being around 800 years old. But this is, again, the central tower over here that we were looking at where the sun comes up. And imagine you stand on this causeway here and you just watch the sun come up over the central tower. This is the causeway where it took this picture from. Okay, sun over the central tower, standing here, walking towards that. Now imagine the precision and the skill you'd have to be able to align the towers with a certain point, with the sun at a certain point in the sky on a certain day. I mean, that is flipping amazing. These astrologically aligned ancient temples always blow me away because for me they're a very clear indication of a highly advanced society that existed long before our present day society. As I say, this looks like this temple was laid out at least 12,500 years before present, and I'll go on to explain why. Now, very interesting to notice in the word Angkor Wat, for those of you who are familiar with the etymology of Dragonology, the word A-N-G is obviously the root word of angel, anger, and angui. Angui is the Latin word for serpent. Interesting. So interesting that the A-N-G root turns up here because was most astonishingly, all right, the layout of Angkor Wat corresponds with the Draco constellation, okay, as it would have appeared in the sky 12,500 years ago, okay. Here is the main temple where we're just looking right now. So this particular complex here is over here, and then of course there is the Draco. This is the lines going from each of the major temple points in Angkor Wat on the ground, and it's laid out exactly like the Draco constellation had been in the sky, mirroring it 12,500 years ago. Absolutely phenomenal. To show you more clearly, this is the sort of satellite image of Angkor Wat, marking the pattern of the temples on the ground, the major temples. And again, this is the constellation Draco, and you can see it's almost a dead-on match. It's very, very difficult for people to say that this is not corresponding with something. Okay, these two definitely correspond to the patterns. So I'll take you back to that previous one that we were at. 12,500 years ago, the constellation Draco would have been at a position in the sky that corresponds with the current position of the Angkor Wat temples laid out in the ground, like a star map. Absolutely amazing. Again, you just got to marvel at the kind of technology these people must have had to be able to accurately do this. It's absolutely incredible. It's not a coincidence, that's for sure. So the reason I show you all of this is because, again, we're talking about the sun and we're talking about the constellations and the zodiac. And here we've got the cross of the zodiac more accurately laid out within the zodiac depictions, marking solstice and equinox. And of course, this has gone on to be the cross which is thought to be the cross of Jesus, who's in fact a sun god as well, very provably so. And just another indication of how the sun determines time. Before we had watches and clocks, we had sundials. That is how we knew what time of the day it was. Here's a sundial, which would typically be sort of no bigger kind of that. But here we've got an on-the-ground sundial, which, you know, this is just a smaller version because this is a kind of on-the-ground marking of the sun. This is just a smaller version of one of those bigger ancient temples, like the one in Cambodia, Angkor Wat. And, you know, for example, Stonehenge. That's what I was trying to find the name of. Stonehenge is also an astrologically aligned structure. It's aligned with various key points of the equinox and solstice. And this is a very old concept. They've been making sundials like this for thousands of years. And this, of course, was how we told the time before we had wristwatches and, you know, church watches up on walls, for example. What's interesting to notice is the corresponding symbolic measurement of time, okay? Again, like the circle or of the zodiacs, both the Chinese zodiac, the Shenzhou, and the Western Hermetic zodiac, we had 12 divisions within the clock. It corresponds perfectly. So the measurements of time measured by the sun are all broken down. First, you've got the big cycle, which is the 12-year cycle, which is the Shenzhou, the Chinese zodiac. Then you've got the 1-year cycle of the sun, which is the Western Hermetic zodiac. And then you've got the smaller version of that, which is the daily cycle. Okay, or at least here the 12-hour cycle. The shorthand goes around that twice. And the longhand goes around it 24 times because it has to make up 24 hours in a day. And like the solstice and equinox lines that we have viewed over here, okay, which you can see over here, you've got the same sort of thing going on in the clock. You've got the 4 major points dividing up into 3. So much like the Western Chinese zodiac, so too is the clock face divided into 12 parts, which also in turn can be further divided into 4 parts to correspond with the 4 seasons, much like the Hermetic zodiac. And of course then those 4 seasons are each divided up into 3 months. And you'll notice this 12, 4, and 3 is a repeating sequence referencing the sun, which in turn, the sun in turn is a multi-layered symbolic allegory masking the dragon. And to prove, just to prove, as I say, Jesus is a sun god, just to prove that the 12, 3, and 4 is important, I want to show you how this is played out in artwork in just a second. Okay? Now, I do want to make a reference to this, the point within the circle, because obviously when we looked at these zodiac depictions, and I'm just going to scroll back here, I made a point of saying the central point is important. Here you've got the yin and yang, also a very important symbolic indicator. Here, the central point where these lines cross, very important. The central point is a very important point. The central point there again, marked out by the sun, isn't it, over there? Now, what you've got is the central point here, which is clearly marked out here, and I want to focus clearly on the point within the circle. Now, for those of you who are into sort of esoteric knowledge, like occult wisdom, you may have come across Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's work. She's the founder of the Theosophical Society, and in her book, The Secret Doctrine, Book 1, on page 4, she goes into a little bit about symbolism, and she talks about the disc with a point in it, so-called a point in it. It says a disk with a point in it is the first differentiation in the ever eternal nature, the potential space within abstract space. So what she's referencing here is all creation. What are we talking about? Creational gods, creational mythology, right? Potential within abstract space. So anything can happen, any creative action can happen, all right? Any manifestation, periodical manifestation of the ever eternal nature. Very interesting. I love the way she describes that. Now, of course, I do want to mention that the third point, the middle point over here would be the 13th hidden principle, supposedly, if we're talking metaphorically within this clock. Okay, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then what's that? That's the 13th hidden principle. And you've got the same thing happening within the zodiac. And of course, we've already touched on the zodiac theme. You see how everything comes back into each other. The 13th zodiac, okay, being Ophiuchus. We've spoken about Ophiuchus before. The number 13 has always been considered bad luck and is often hidden. For example, the number of streets you walk down, you'll find number 10, number 11, number 12, number 12A, number 14, whoops, we missed number 13. See, they don't name a house 13, they name it 12A. Very commonly done. I've seen this a lot in my hometown. So what have they done here? They've hidden the 13th zodiac. And why? Because the 13th zodiac is a very important zodiac. It's the zodiac known as Ophiuchus. All right, the symbol of Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. All right, and you can see Ophiuchus holding serpents, which is divided into serpent's caput, the head part, and serpent's cauda, the tail part, nonetheless known as one constellation, the constellation of serpents. And the word Ophiuchus contains the dragon root word Ophi. For those who know how Dragonology works and you understand the dragon root words, you'll know that this is not new information. Welcome to go research it for yourself. For example, the word Ophiolatry references serpent worship. Okay? So, Ophiuchus with the dragon root word Ophi. Interesting, of course, because Ophiuchus is the serpent bearer. Now, I do want to show you again, we were talking about the central point, right? The central point that we talk about here, okay? And how important that is. And this is very, very commonly referenced, and that we talk about the 12, the 4, and the 3 numerological values that indicate the sun symbol. And we talk about Jesus being a sun god. Well, for me, the best example of this played on artwork is The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. And of course, for anybody who has seen the Da Vinci Code, you'll know that Leonardo da Vinci was, in fact, a member of the Priory of Sion, a secret society where he was endowed with occult knowledge. Now, the word Sion is just another word for sun. So he was a member of a secret society that was known as the Priory of the Sun. Interesting. So being taught in the Priory of the sun symbolism he's learned to encode into his paintings are very obvious in The Last Supper. Okay, let's have a look at this. This, of course, is a computer-generated version of the image, what it would have looked like when it was pristine. It's, of course, very worn and very old now. It doesn't look anything nearly as good as this. But when you actually look at how it's divided up, for example, you have 13th principle, the sun in the middle, and you've got the 4 divisions, okay, and each of the divisions have 3 months, and each of the divisions are one of the seasons, as per the zodiac, which proves that Jesus is a sun god, because there is astrological correspondence in, look how they're divided into groups of 3, groups of 3, groups of 3, groups of 3, all right? The 12 disciples are in groups of 3, making up 4 groups in total. Interesting, the 12, 3, and 4 with Jesus. 13th central principle. Let's see how central is Jesus in this picture. Oh my word, look, if you take a line from each corner of the painting, now Jesus is the most central. His face is the most central point of that painting, like all the other sun symbolism in all the other featured allegorical images that we've already looked at. See, it always ties into each other. Everything will always meet up because symbology is universal. This symbolism is encoded in so many different ways. Very, very interesting. Now, we're going on with the theme of time, and of course we've mentioned already that the sun, which is what we've been trying to illustrate here, the importance of the sun and the deepness of the allegory of the sun. Time is measured by the sun. Now let's take the theme of time one step further, and we're going to be dealing with Father Time and the Weeping Virgin. The image of Father Time and the Weeping Virgin. Very, very important. Of course, we did deal with this in Dragonology Season 3, I beg your pardon, Season 2. So this should not be old, it should not be any new territory for those of you who are familiar with this material. And what you've got here is Father Time and the Weeping Virgin. Now you'll notice he's carrying a skip here, which is used for harvesting, okay, which you will commonly find with images of Santa Muerta or the Grim Reaper. So the harvest symbol, you notice wings, so draconian, reptilian, dragon, angel, okay, represented. You've got the hourglass, of course, for Father Time. You've got the olive leaf, which is actually thought to be a symbolic representation of Satan. It's known as a zaitan in the Arabic languages, the olive branch, and zaitan is etymologically cognizant with Satan. And then, of course, the broken pillar. And this, of course, can be representative of the symbolic of a sacrifice or a war or the broken state. But what's interesting is both the olive tree, the olive branch, and the broken pillar or the column, again, are extended allegories or symbols which mask the dragon. I've gone into this previously as well. But what I want to talk about for this moment is, what is Father Time doing? He seems to be fluffing up the Virgin's hair. Well, what he's actually doing is cutting the hair. That's why he's got the skip. He's going to cut the hair. In some depictions, you actually see him holding the skip to her hair. Okay, you'll see him actually bringing it up to her hair. But this one, you just see him holding the hand. The skip is in his arm as if he's going to, maybe raise it later and cut it. But this is about the cutting of the hair. All right, the cutting of the hair, very significant, and it's normally done with that. Why this image is significant? Why? It's because it turns up in Masonic imagery and symbolism. This is a very common Masonic drawing board with the two pillars. You've got here again the compass and the ruler with the letter G, and most common Masonic symbol, the all-seeing eye. This is very common. What looks to be a bit of a pyramid depiction here. Again, very common, not uncommon at all. See the eye above a pyramid. And in the background over here, that is the depiction of Father Time cutting the Virgin's hair. So, as we're dealing with the theme of time, I'm going to take this a little bit further because this ties into the ritual elements that we will get to explore on a much deeper level as we go into Season 3. Now, here's a very interesting picture I found, a medieval picture of a guy feeding babies to dragons, because, that is the reality, right? These shape-shifting dragons, whether they be royalty or leaders of state or whatever, there may be elitists living in their castles. Many of them can shape-shift. Many of them are eating human beings. Some of them are eating babies, and these kids are being sacrificed in ritualistic ceremonies. Now, a common recurring theme in Dragonology is the hidden votive, or the supposition, or what we call the, how do we say, supplanted, or an example of is Abraham was supposed to sacrifice his younger son Isaac. Instead, he substituted, that's the word I'm looking for, he substituted the ram in the thicket and sacrificed the ram instead of Isaac. Now, the substitute is very important because often you'll find that the sacrifice is symbolically substituted with something else to mask what it actually is, which is always about sacrificing a life, a child, most likely. We get into that much more as we go into Season 3. It gets quite deep and dark, but it's interesting. You have to get the basic building blocks first. So a common recurring theme in Dragonology is the hidden votive. Okay, as you said, the hidden votive often can be represented in various ways. So, for example, a gift. The whole concept of gifting, we've gone through this in season 2. Gifting, which is the hidden votive, because the gift is normally concealed with wrapping paper, all right? And when you give a gift away, you're actually sacrificing something, all right? Just like when most people put offerings, they're giving something away, okay? The giving of a gift. Gifting is all a sacrificial offering. Now, the same with trick-or-treating, and we cover this off in season 2 as well. Trick-or-treating, again, is a hidden votive, all right? It's a substitution of a sacrificial ritual that's masked behind symbolic representation, okay? So all hidden votives are really just symbolic representations of sacrificial offering, which are masked behind symbolism. Now, the particular symbolism that I really want to draw attention to here, of course, would have been the cutting of the hair. We're talking about the hair today because we dealt with this a lot in previous season 2, right? The word hair is etymologically cognizant with hair as in the rabbit, and of course heir as in the heir of a fortune or the heir to the throne. So the ritual significance of hair cutting is prevalent in many cultures and religions. In fact, this is a picture from a Mongolian hair cutting ceremony. In many religions, including the Hindu and Judaism, there is great significance in the hair cutting ritual, particularly the first haircut, all right? The first haircut. Now, you must remember that, the first, because the first comes up again, all right, as in the firstborn being the heir, all right? The firstborn child would be the heir to the throne or the heir to the fortune, for example. The throne, for example, I'll get into it in a minute, but let's talk about hair. So we're talking about this one, hair over here. Hair, this kind of hair, and the Easter hair, those two words are etymologically cognizant with each other. And that's not an accident because the Easter hair is also a hidden votive, which is symbolic of child sacrifice. And when do we celebrate Easter? Again, around the spring equinox. See, the equinox comes up again. It's all about the movements of the sun, ritual with tied into the movements of the sun. And of course, the heir, a person who is entitled to inherit rank, title, position, etc. And the heir to the throne of England, of course, over here, Prince William. I think that's William here. Yeah, Prince William, not Harry. Harry's the younger one. And of course, his heir, the firstborn child. So that is the heir, person who is entitled to inherit the rank, the title, position of another. The heir is usually the firstborn. So the first in line to the throne would be the firstborn son. Okay? The sacrificing of the firstborn is a recurring theme that is very prevalent in biblical texts. For example, the theme of the Passover, which again happens around Easter time. You have stories of the firstborn children of Egypt being sacrificed, etc. And the theme of the firstborn sacrifice, the firstborn, is hugely, again, multi-layered. And we're going to deconstruct this multi-layered symbol so that you can understand just how deep it goes. Right, the firstborn and the changeling. This gets very interesting. And of course, if you want more detail about this, you can go and read my book. I go into this in quite a lot of detail there. The firstborn and the changeling. The sacrificing of the firstborn is symbolic of ritual. It's symbolically, ritually indicative of the changeling aspect. Okay, a changeling is a creature found in folklore and religion. And please do go Google the word changeling for yourself, and you can see what it is. If you actually look at Google, it says a changeling is a child who is believed to be a fairy child. And if you say fairy is a dragon, is an angel. The fairy is a dragon, is an angel. The changeling is a child who was believed to be a fairy child that had been left in place of a human child which was stolen by the fairies. The theme of a swapped child is common in medieval literature. So we wonder, like, how did these kings and queens get to be in the position they're in? They seem to just have usurped humanity and now control us all, and this is how it was done. Yeah, this is how it was done, is that obviously noble families had their children taken and swapped out with dragon children, which is how we ended up with these dragon gods and rulers and kings and queens in places of positions of power. And this is a very interesting painting, actually. This is the devil steals a baby and leaves a changeling behind. Early 15th century detail of the legend of Saint Stephen. See the devil, see, here they say it's a fairy, but here they say it's a devil, again indicating that the fairy, the devil, the angels, the jinn, are all the same creatures as the dragon. Again with wings, cloven hooves, common symbols, the horns, we've been through all that before, common symbol of the dragon, stealing what looks to be a human child and replacing it with a dragon child, because you can see the horns there. Very interesting. So these themes come up a lot. Again, it's a 15th century painting depicting the changeling aspect. Now, changeling and angels. Very interesting to note. An allegory of the changeling is illegitimate and recounts the usurpation of man's progeny with dragons or angel offspring. All right. So that's what they're saying is the changeling is an illegitimate child or an orphan child. You know, the parents aren't the real parents or something to that nature. And we'll get on to the orphan in a moment. But if you have a look at the word changeling, just look, hang on, it's got the word angel in it. Oh, you know, just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. So that's it. A changeling, of course, we spoke about this here. Changeling is an illegitimate child or a child that's been swapped out. Normally a child that doesn't know who their parents are. And this brings us into the orphan aspect, all right? An orphan is defined as a child who has lost their parents. Same as a changeling, which in turn is code. Okay, the word orphan is in turn code for the fact that the parents are unknown or hidden due to the parents being dragons or angels or demons or jinn or whatever you want to call them. You have a look at the word orphan. It gives us away very clearly, okay? The word orphan is comprised of two key dragon root words, being the root word or, which is the most common dragon root word that you find coming up, and fan. Unmistakable, this one, fan, because this comes up in a lot of other interesting places. Let's have a look. The word fan, from orphan, comes from the word fanes. Let's have a look at fanes. Wow, fanes has a serpent wrapped around him with wings as well. Very interesting. Oh, and what do we have here? This is the zodiac, okay, depicted over here. These are symbols of the zodiac depicted inside the cosmic egg, I beg your pardon. So again, the same themes coming up again and again and again. Always notice the themes. So fanes or protagonos, meaning firstborn. Here we've got the firstborn theme coming up again. Protagonos means firstborn, or the first god, was the prime evil deity of procreation and generation of new life, who was introduced into the Greek pantheon by the Orphics. Okay, now the Orphic traditions, the Orphics used to be serpent worshippers. In fact, the word Orph is a dragon root word, as indicated in purple. That is a very clear dragon root word. An example of this would be Morpheus or Orpheus. Those are names with the dragon root word Orph in it. Other words from the fanes root word group are phantom, pan, and pain, interestingly enough. So orphans and changelings. We find orphans everywhere in myths, fairy tale, and fantasy fiction, such as orphan heroes whose parents are dead, absent, or unknown, who turned out to be Batman or Superman or heirs to the kingdom, the bearers of magical powers. The orphan hero is not a mere fantasy cliche. Rather, it is a deliberate archetype existing in some of the oldest stories of the world. This archetype includes not only those characters who are literally orphaned by the death of their parents, but also children who are lost, abandoned, cast out, or even disinherited by evil step-parents. Or perhaps they are raised in supernatural captivity or reared by wild animals. This ties into the deep cachet of tales of stolen children and abandoned kids, which have been taken by fairies or angels or demons or jinns or gypsies, and they are swapped around with children, sometimes known as changelings, which are often of the dragon lineage. Now, let's have a look at some examples of this. One of the most commonly known stories that we hear about when we think of, an abandoned child. Of course, they say they put Moses into a basket and sailed him down the river. Well, baskets, boats, manger, the allegory is all symbolically significant and representative of the dragon. Okay? Now Moses, as I say, was put into a basket by his mother and found and raised by Egyptian royalty. And this story is commonly repeated over and over again in various versions. Okay? Here's another one, Cyrus the Great. This is a sculpture of Cyrus, as you can see, with horns and with wings. Interesting that. According to Persian legend, which is similar to that of Moses, Cyrus the Great's grandfather dreamed that his grandson would one day claim his throne and ordered all children to be killed. So the grandfather ordered all children killed, just like Moses was ordered to be killed. But the steward that was given the infant to kill it was unable to kill the baby and, of course, gave it to a herdsman instead. As Cyrus grew older, his looks betrayed his dragon lineage. Of course, he sprouted wings and, looks like a snake as opposed to a human. So eventually Cyrus took the throne of Persia and founded the Persian Empire, okay, which is massive. And the Persian Empire eventually captured Rome, took over there. So, yeah, very interesting. Lots of interesting words that start with per. One of the most common dragon root words, per. In fact, the peri, which is P-E-R-I, is a Persian version of a dragon or a Persian version of an angel. Then, of course, there's Paris, all right? Paris. Now, the word per, P-A-R, and P-E-R, or per, are etymologically consonant with each other and are both dragon root words, P-A-R and P-E-R. Okay, so Paris. In the Greek myth, it has been twice foretold that Paris, the son of Priam and Hecuba, was destined to cause the fall of Troy. Priam instructed the herdsman to give his son a quick and painless death. Poor herdsman always have to do this horrible stuff. But the herdsman was unable to kill the baby. Instead, he left the infant exposed on the mountainside. The herdsman returned 9 days later to find the infant was being suckled by a mother bear. The herdsman took pity on the child and gave it to his wife. When Paris grew up, his abduction of Helen of Troy sparked the Trojan War. Okay? And here's another one. Of course, sometimes it happens about ladies too. Similar stories about legendary women. In the Assyrian myth, for example, the sea goddess Deketo, I'm not sure of the exact pronunciation, the sea goddess Deketo dallied with the mortal youth and found herself pregnant by him. Although taking mortal lovers was not uncommon, and it was in fact done. If you go into the book of Genesis, you can see how the sons of God came unto the daughters of men and bore children with them, right? It was the children, the bearing of the children that was considered shameful, okay, the half God, half human offspring. So giving birth to a half mortal child was shameful. And soon after the child was born, the little daughter called Semiramis, Deketo killed herself. And Semiramis was kept alive by doves and grew up to be a warrior. And this is why one of the symbols of Semiramis is in fact the dove, and why dove symbolism keeps recurring over and over again, symbol of the goddess Semiramis. But Queen Semiramis went on to conquer large parts of Asia, and she was known as a moon goddess, was married to King Nimrod, who was said to be the great-grandson of Noah. Very interesting, and I just want to show you how important they were, because they were considered to be the Babylonian Holy Trinity. Semiramis, the moon goddess with the moon on her head. Nimrod here depicted with horns, interesting. And of course Tammuz, their offspring, the child, depicted with wings, a symbol of angels or dragons. But they were considered to be the Babylonian Holy Trinity. And there's great similarity if you look at the pictures of Semiramis and Tammuz. They look very much like the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, or Isis and Horus. So You know what I'm saying? All religions have the same themes and archetypes because they all came from the same common root, which is ophiolatry, the worship of the dragon. Now, probably the most popular and famous story of abandoned infants is the tale of Remus and Romulus, which starts with the king of Albalong, who is overthrown by a wicked stepbrother, who also forces his niece to become a Vestal virgin in order to end the king's true line. But the niece becomes pregnant anyway by the god Mars. So notice that they already are, divine offspring, angelic royal offspring, okay? So the niece is pregnant by God, or immortal, and she gives birth to Remus and Romulus. And the false king has the twins exposed on the banks of the Tiber River, assuming they would perish. Instead, they were suckled by a she-wolf and raised by herdsmen, again, the blessed herdsmen. They go on to found Rome on Palatine Hill, creating its first legions and senates. All right? Very interesting. So you have this theme coming up again and again of abandoned or orphan children who grow up to be great heroes in mythology and legend. And of course, we've covered this one off before as well. The story of Cinderella and how Cinderella was also supposedly orphaned, raised by her stepmother and stepsister, to wicked stepmother and stepsisters. And of course, it was her foot that fitted the slipper. And we've gone on to talk about how symbolic glass is in this whole dragon symbology escapade. It really is an important symbolic indicator, and this whole story of Cinderella is in itself hugely symbolic. There's massive underlying dragonology themes there. But basically, the reason the slipper fitted, the glass slipper, nonetheless, was because Cinderella was, of course, of the dragon, angel, or royal bloodline, which is why she was picked to marry a prince. Because, they're very strict about, very tight about interbreeding and, marrying throughout bloodlines. So it wouldn't be just to be a case of the fact that her foot fitted a slipper. It's a glass slipper, and glass is symbolic of the dragon bloodline, which is why we have Glastonbury, where who was buried? Who was buried at Glastonbury? King Arthur Pendragon was buried at Glastonbury, which is why glass is so significant. Okay, now we've been talking about here how these great heroes, are often the abandoned orphans, and this repeats in so many different stories. The concept of the hero turns up in many myths, fairy tales, and modern-day storylines, and is common in all cultures. A hero typically references a person of superhuman strength or abilities, and is usually the most important legendary figure of a culture, sometimes the founder of its ruling dynasty, much like Remus and Romulus were. Okay? Very interesting that. So that's the hero. Now, orphan themes and superheroes are very common. Let me just think of some examples. For example, Batman. Anyone knows the story of Batman? They always go on when they remake Batman for the umpteenth time that they've made it. They always go back to recount the story of how Batman's parents were killed. Okay, and yeah, that's very interesting, because guess what? You've got the same thing with Superman. Superman's parents also, died on Krypton. He's the last surviving person from Krypton, supposedly. It's just a constant reoccurring theme that, superheroes are also orphan, and orphan actually means dragon. Very interesting. I've got a picture of Captain America here, because one of the things I love about the Captain America outfit is they actually put scales on it. You see that they look like scales to you? Not only that, you've got a lovely, pentagram. Okay. Not only that, you've got wings on the side of his head, much like the Gorgon Medusa has wings on the side of her head, and much like you find Hermes with wings on the side of his head. And the wings, as you know, on the side of the head are symbolic of the dragon bloodline. Interesting that. Okay, prophet. Now, as pagan pantheism turned to monotheism, the archetype of the hero from myths and legends evolved into the prophet. The concept of hero and prophet are exactly the same. Okay, the prophet is made up of the dragon root word ophi. Yes, another dragon root word in there. Wow, No coincidence at all. And it's no coincidence, of course, that the homonym of profit, P-R-O-F-P-H-E-T, is profit, P-R-O-F-I-T, okay, to make money. And of course, the indication of this being that profit or hero and profit are indication of a divine covenant of sacrifice, submission, and contract. You know, sacrifice is the paying of taxes, you know, profit, you know. Anyway, I think that's it for tonight, folks. We're pretty much done with Dragonology, episode 1, season 3. Please do go check out the archives, all available at ccn.media. And everything we've got, all the shows we've done today on CCN are available there, so please do check it out. And of course, if you've missed anything, Dragonology seasons 1 and 2 are available on the dragonology.info website for quick reference. And you can also download a copy of my book, Dragonology Book 1 Spellbreaker. For €20, you get a €5 discount if you use the coupon code Dragonology S1. So just use the word Dragon. I beg your pardon. Thank you, Biggie. Dragonology S3. So write the word Dragonology, letter S3 in your coupon code, and you get a €5 discount. You can download a copy of Dragonology Spellbreaker for €20. And of course, that is available from the dragonology.info website. And people wanting to check out other broadcasts on Conscious Consumer Network can do so. Please go to the broadcast guide and see what is on, what the time changes are. We are into a new year with a whole new lineup and great new broadcasts starting. So please check it out and keep up to date with what's happening. And we'd like you, of course, to support the network support for 2017. This is an independently run media network supported by the public with no government funding. We are completely free and independent and completely dedicated to the pursuit of truth and the educating of humanity. So everyone, please support the network and keep us on the air for 2017. And please do find everything you need to, the Network Support Fund, Dragonology Support Fund, also the broadcast guide. Everything is available on consciousconsumernetwork.tv, which is the main website for CCN. And of course, we'd like to thank you for supporting free and independent media. It's been great to be with you, and we'll see you next week for episode 2 of season 3 of Dragonology. My name's Mel V. It's been great being with you, and I will see you all again.